Welcome, Ernie. You've been traveling a lot.
Yeah, always, always. I was in Japan and then came back to Los Angeles for 3 days and then went to Germany and Italy and then came back here. So it's busy. My body doesn't know where it is. You know, we were talking about earlier how I'm very, very slow with the jet lag. So by the time I get normalized in the time zone I'm in, then it's time to move.
To move.
Yeah. So I'm
Well,
jet lagged about 7 months out of the year.
Where do you live now?
Well, I live in Colorado near Aspen, outside of a little town called Carbondale.
Oh, yeah.
And then I have a little townhouse in Los Angeles because my office is in Los Angeles and the music business aspect is there for me.
Well, the reason I asked is because many musicians for a long time had to live in, you had to live in L.A. and I had to live in New York, and you had to live close to the job. The job's all over the place now.
Well, yeah, and when I was doing a lot of studio work, you had to be in Los Angeles because you had to be by the phone. Because, you know, it would be like Wednesday and you would think that the day was clear, and by 2 o'clock on Wednesday, you know, you had 2 or 3 record dates. So you never really knew what was going to happen, so you had to kind of stay close. But now that I do a lot of other things, I don't have to be by the telephone.
Well, that's a blessing.
Yeah, it is.
For sure. Well, let's go back a bit. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Close by.
Yeah, I started
what was it
playing.
like growing up in Wilmington? Was there much jazz there in those days?
Well, you know, there were a lot of things happening in Philadelphia. There were a lot of things happening in New York. Clifford Brown is from Wilmington. John Coltrane and Benny Golson, a lot of great players spent a lot of time in Philadelphia. So Wilmington was rather quiet, but there were things going on. For me, I mainly learned how to play from listening to records and playing by ear, because by the time I was coming along, a lot of the players that were the great players from Philadelphia, they were already here and traveling and that kind of thing. So Wilmington was relatively quiet at the time I was there, so it was a great place to practice.
A great place to practice.
Yeah, it's a great place to practice.
Did you study there? Did you study music there?
Well, yeah. When I started to play, there wasn't any jazz program in our school system, so I learned how to play the saxophone classically from the classical clarinet teacher at the Wilmington Music School, which was our conservatory there. So I studied the classical repertoire for the saxophone, and then simultaneously I was learning how to improvise by ear. So it was always a combination of playing playing the literature for classical saxophone and various transcriptions, Bach, Beethoven, and that kind of thing, and then listening to like hundreds of hours of records, just learning how to play, learning sounds, and learning to improvise from a totally melodic concept of playing for quite a while.
That is one of the reasons I think your playing is so distinctive, because you do think, even though some of the melodies are very complicated and very complex, they are melodies, and you seem to think melodically, and it may have a lot of twists and turns, but it's a melody, you know.
Yeah, everything I do is melodically oriented. Yeah.
Well, you know, the place in Wilmington where you studied, that I guess a lot of music was taught there, and a lot of good people came through there. That was quite a place. Where'd you go after that?
Well, after I graduated from high school, I went to the Westchester, it was called Westchester State Teachers College at the time in Pennsylvania. I went there for 1 year, and then I won a Downbeat, one of the Downbeat scholarships to the Berklee School of Music. And I went up to Berklee for 2 years, and that's when I started to learn about harmony. You know, that's when I started to make the combination of playing intuitively and playing from harmonic knowledge. You know, I learned about the chord scales, and I just spent hours and hours and hours studying and practicing all the chord scales. I learned that if you learn all the scales for all of the chords, then it's impossible to make a mistake.
That's right.
right? Because you know all the
You
notes.
know all those
so
notes.
then after that, you know, improvisation becomes sort of an elaborate game of multiple choice. You know.
That's right.
So it plugged in a lot of a lot of working knowledge for me. I mean, the first saxophonist that really impressed me was John Coltrane. I heard the first jazz record my mother ever bought for me. You know, she bought me a little Silvertone record player.
Right.
I grew up out of the Sears catalog. Right. So Silvertone was their music division. Yeah. And my mother bought me this little Silvertone stereo record player, and she joined the Columbia Record Club. And the freebie, you know, when you join the Columbia Record Club, you get a freebie, right? So the freebie that year was a Miles record called Kinda Blue. So that tells you how old I am, those of you who know this music. Kinda Blue was a new record that year. And I heard Coltrane on that record, and it was like sticking my finger in a light socket. You know, I mean, I never heard anything like that in my life. So I started taking my allowance money and my lunch money and buying Coltrane records. And then I'd stack them on my little Silvertone record player at night, and I'd listen to these Coltrane records while I went to sleep, you know. So I sort of programmed my subconscious mind how to think melodically in that way, but I knew absolutely nothing about what he was doing harmonically.
Right.
It was just totally from a melodic concept. Then when I got up to Berklee, I kind of started to put the pieces together.
Well, let's put the pieces together in a little different way. You talked about a song that Charlie Parker did on alto some time ago. The Star Eyes.
Right, this is one of the first tunes I ever heard.
You want to talk about that a little bit and then play it?
Well, like I said, when I was learning how to play, I was learning how to play by ear. And my parents were very supportive. They were really great, but they weren't music people, so they didn't really know how to direct my energy. We just sort of heard whatever was on the radio. And what was on the radio at that time, it was the birth of rock and roll. So it was Elvis Presley, it was Little Richard, it was the Platters, it was that kind of thing. So the only saxophone on the radio were some King Curtis solos on some of the Platters and some of those kind of pop records. So my neighbors started to lend me records, and that's how I first started to hear jazz. The first jazz record my neighbor loaned me was a Dave Brubeck record called Jazz Goes to College, and I heard Paul Desmond. And so that was very encouraging to me. For those of you who know about Paul Desmond, he was a very melodic, simple, clear player. And I could hear him play on a record, and I could copy the things on the record. So it was very encouraging, because I said to myself, well, maybe I can do this jazz thing. You know, I can hear this guy, I'm hearing this guy play, and I can play this stuff. Hey, you know, so then my neighbor kept lending me records, and he loaned me Charlie Parker records and Eric Dolphy records, and I had a wonderful education in different sounds. And one of the tunes that I remember playing or hearing Charlie Parker play was this classic called Star Eyes.
All right. Ernie Watts. Jim Jackson. Winnett Harper. Thank you. Thank you very much.